From the start of this series, the final layer of the iceberg of learning a game was laid out as learning the game's metagame. Broadly speaking, the metagame is the relative power of how different strategies and game pieces interact. For example, generally a 4/3 creature in Magic is better than a 3/4. It can deal more damage on attack, and it can trade up against larger creatures with 4 toughness, whereas the 3/4 would just be a roadblock. However, if there is a lot of 3/3 creatures or 3 damage burn spells running around, suddenly you're much more interested in the 3/4 instead. So far, this three-way balance of cards is looking pretty similar to what we were looking at in the previous level. The big difference here comes in which cards within this pool we're looking at. A game's effect categories are the rule of averages. What effects are efficient and powerful enough to be playable, and how that standard library impacts gameplay patterns. What determines the meta, on the other hand, is the rule of exceptions. What is not only playable, but powerful. Players don't play to the baseline. They are going to optimize for the strongest option possible, and then fill out the remainder of their deck with baseline cards. Returning to our earlier example, where the meta is centered around Bolt and your choice of playing a 3/4 or a 4/3, then a 4/4 creature, at similar cost, is going to substantially change the calculation. Suddenly the 3/4s are dramatically worse, since this creature can easily roll over them. And the only other option are 4/3s, which is a card that is easily dealt with by Bolt. In this 4-card meta, the only real viable deck is going to be the exceptional meta-stapled 4/4, rounded out by the on-rate Bolt to clean up anything that it has trouble with. Sometimes meta cards are just strictly better than their peers, but the game's surrounding context matters a lot as well. In a vacuum, Pot of Greed is better than Graceful Charity, since Pot of Greed is a +1 card advantage, where Graceful leaves you with the same number of cards in hand as you started with. But if a deck has a way to utilize the graveyard, suddenly Graceful can become a +2 card advantage, which is actually more powerful. Often, if a card is very powerful but only in a specific strategy, it will become a cornerpost of that strategy and draw players to build around it to try and make use of the most powerful cards possible. There are generally two types of metas in games. One is very good, and one is very bad, and realistically most games are going to fall somewhere in between the two. The ideal is a variety of viable deck types of all roughly similar power level, with plenty of options for counterplay against different strategies. Like the 3-card meta example we started with the 3/4 creature reducing the play frequency of 3 damage removal, which in turn makes 4/3s more viable to sneak in extra damage, the ideal meta is one that is capable of self-correcting. This can, but doesn't have to, take on a rock-paper-scissors dimension, where one card or deck type might be strong against one archetype, but weak against another. If the strongest meta cards available are split across different deck colors and archetypes, this is often what is going to happen. However, if the game's best cards are overly generic and can easily slot into multiple deck types, or are all very specific but all part of the same deck type, then you begin on the dark path to a Tier 0 meta, when all of the strongest cards are thrown into the same overwhelming deck. Early Yu-Gi-Oh! Is of course a prime example of this with Good Stuff Beatdown, but a lot of trading card games, especially early in their run, when they don't fully grasp the balance of the game they're designing, are going to fall into the same trap. Tier 0 metas are terrible for a game because the entire appeal of a trading card game is the wide variety of decks you can create, and if your choice is crushing defeat or endless mirror matches, then that's not only stifling player creativity, it usually makes for a boring and unpleasant play experience as well. Players very rarely quit games because of the base rules, or the implied rules, or even the effect library of a game. Usually if a player quits a game, it is because of a bad meta. Even then, while one bad meta on its own can be a significant blow, as long as the game's creators are responsive, it's rarely fatal. What is most damaging to a game over time is when bad metas last long enough for players to lose confidence in the creator's ability to deliver a good game experience, and that lost confidence is what will destroy a game in the long run. It is important to note that each layer of this iceberg is more fluid than the level above it. The core rules change rarely, and never drastically. Card design can nudge the rules' implications a bit, but generally the implied rules are fairly static as well. The effect library tends not to change quickly or drastically, but it is often adjusted over time. Indeed, one of the great strengths of the effect library of trading card games is, unless the base rules are completely hopeless, an effect library can shift the game from its initial play patterns and patch over weaknesses in the first two levels. And in many cases, it will actually play a larger role in how the game plays out than the core rules themselves. At the bottom of the iceberg, the meta is definitely the most fluid here. It can and should change significantly and often. In a fundamentally expanding game, even good metas can become taxing if they become stagnant, if the game feels solved and new additions are feeling meaningless. Metas need a certain amount of churn to keep players engaged. So, how do metas change over time? As the rule of exceptions, metas are largely built out of single cards, and those cards are generally going to shift in and out of prominence in four main ways. The first is that they can rotate out. Set rotation is usually really good for enforcing meta shifts over time. In Magic the Gathering, cards like Decree of Justice, Cruel Ultimatum, and Siege Rhino are all cards that had a period of dominance in the standard meta, and then they smoothly rotated out to make way for new cards in a new meta. A less desirable alternative is when cards prove too powerful to wait until normal rotation, and must be banned completely from competitive play. Games without rotation, or with a meta churn cycle that's significantly faster than their rotation period, will likely have no choice but to lean on the ban option more often. A third option is power creep. As cards gradually increase in power over time, older cards will fall behind. Mechanical Chaser was once a meta-defining card in Yu-Gi-Oh!, and nowadays playing any monsters at all without an effect, no matter their power, is completely laughable. For games without rotation that manage not to print anything blatantly broken, power creep is often the only option. But even within rotating games, a little bit of power creep can help with meta development over time, if sets towards the tail end of a rotation period are slightly stronger than the sets at the beginning of the rotation cycle. This will create a natural churn over the course of the year, and not just leave all of the major meta changes to happen once during the rotation period. The final way to churn through meta cards is quite similar to power creep, but with a bit of a twist. That's when meta-defining effects transition into the game's overall effect library. In the Gundam trading card game, Amuro Ray is easily one of the strongest cards available, to the point that there have been discussions about if he needs a ban. However, with Lock-On as a new version of a similar effect, it looks like the game may instead be trying to spread similar effects at a similar power level into different archetypes and make that effect more of a standard going forward, rather than an outlier. Keep in mind that nearly all effect library effects start out as a single card before being repeated in different variations to become a staple of the effect design of the game going forward. As the final level of the iceberg and the most fluid, as a player, the understanding and adapting to the meta is the most important level for gaining a competitive advantage over your opponents. As a designer, it's also the easiest level to screw up, and in the long run is the level that will do the most damage to the game if it's mismanaged. By the same token, though, a lot of established players and designers often spend most of their time looking at the meta, and they can forget that learning a TCG is a journey down an entire iceberg. So, when you're approaching a new game, take it a step at a time, and even if you're feeling unsinkable, maybe don't aim directly at the thing. And don't forget to have a fantastic day.